Okay, so this is a lecture about peer effects. And peer effects seem to matter in many contexts. So first, what are peer effects? There are essentially situations where individual choices, actions, and outcomes are affected by the characteristics, actions, choices, and outcomes of their peers. And peers could be, anything: family members, friends, neighbors, classmates, colleagues. So economists and other social scientists have been interested in peer effects for a long time. And you can find interesting studies of peer effects on many, many kinds of outcomes, including smoking, academic achievement, academic trajectories, so the choice of a major, voting behavior, adoption of new products or new technologies, but also, criminal behavior, labor supply, effort exerted at work, and even obesity. Right, there was a famous paper by Christakis and Fowler a few years back claiming to show that there is contagion on obesity. Okay? Their estimates are likely very biased, but it's an important topic. So estimating these peer effects, especially on obesity, but on any context, is quite hard, and it requires to address three difficult empirical challenges. First, you must find the right peers somehow. Second, you must deal with the problem of correlated effects, which is essentially confounding factors, which can be broadly categorized into common shocks and, endogenous peer groups. And third, there is a reflection problem, which is about the type of peer effect that works. I'll tell you everything you have to know about the reflection problem in the talk. So in the introduction, I wanted to just give you my sense of where the literature currently stands on these three issues. First, on finding the right peers, in most studies at this stage, peers are still very, very much assumed, and assumed due to data and data limitations. Okay, so this is not very satisfactory. There has been some important progress made in the past, 8 years or so, on the fact that in the pre-network world, if you want, most studies on peer effects were about groups. So society is partitioned in groups like classrooms, and everyone is equally affected by everyone in his group, but not affected by anyone outside of the group. And now we've switched to networks, and in networks, essentially what networks allow you to do is to assume that every agent has a specific peer group. Okay? So we have heterogeneity in the peer groups. This is a progress, but still, what people do is if they have network data, they just estimate, say, self-reported friendships. They just estimate, peer effects on whatever outcomes they have in their data, criminal behavior, grade, smoking, on, friendship networks, friendship peers. But who knows whether these are the right peers, right? So for smoking and teenagers, it might be the right group, but for academic achievement, maybe classmates or, good students in classes are more appropriate peers. There is some interesting current research being done on trying to recover the right peers from the data. Okay? And I hope to have time to talk a bit about this. Second, which is probably the main, endogeneity problem in this literature, correlated effects. And here I'm afraid to say that at this stage, the best solution is to have some kind of exogenous variation, either in some covariate or in peers. So some randomized, treatment or randomized groups. If you don't have this, good data and fixed effects, especially in a panel setup, can help, but they're not as convincing. There is some very interesting research currently being done on structural models on network endogeneity, trying to, correct for network endogeneity into these peer effects regressions by modeling how network is formed. And again, I hope to have time to talk on this. So this is where the literature on peer effects, is getting close to the literature that Matt was discussing earlier. Finally, there is a reflection problem. So there is a famous paper by Chuck Mansky, Review of Economic Studies 93, that first clarified this reflection problem. So it's a problem. So even if you have solved the first two challenges, right? So you have the right peers, everything is randomized. You still have this issue that in linear models, you may not be able to identify the type of peer effects at work. So again, I'll be clearer about this in the lecture. So following Mansky, it was essentially thought to be unsolvable. It was like fact of life in linear models, and there has been little subsequent work on it. There has been some work showing that with nonlinear models, it could be addressed somehow. But so we recently understood, collectively, and I have been working on this issue for a while, that under network interaction, this is actually not a very big problem. Okay. So it's typically addressed in quant studies based on network data. At least we got one problem solved. So briefly, what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to first present a benchmark model of peer effects in networks. And I'm going to discuss identification and the reflection problem in this benchmark model. And then I'm going to discuss key limitations on the benchmark model. And any key limitation is more or less the direction of quant research. So here is the benchmark model. It's benchmarked in several senses. First, there has been many studies, estimating a model like this or, a simple variation on this. And second, it's benchmarked because if you're used to doing, linear regressions, it would be probably the first kind of model you would want to assume to look at peer effects. Okay. So we are trying to explain some outcome yi as a function of some covariate xi. In this talk, I assume there is only one covariate. Everything extends to k covariates. Now, every agent has some peers denoted by this, ni, and I'm already in a network context, so every agent can have different sets of peers. And so in a linear context, we assume that outcome is affected by individual characteristic. This is usually called the contextual peer effect. So it's the impact of the mean of the covariate on outcome. Okay. So for instance, if xi is gender, 0, 1, for male or female, this would be like the fraction of girls among your friends. Okay. And this is usually called the endogenous peer effect. So it's the mean outcome among your peers. So for instance, if y is smoking, right, this would mean the mean smoking rate among your friends. So you're already seeing the two different types of peer effects. And in this benchmark model, for what I'm going to discuss now, but we'll get back to this later, I will assume that, all the other endogeneity problems have been addressed. Okay. So somehow covariates and Pierce variables are exogenous. So for instance, one example of situation where this assumption can be taken seriously is when you have a randomized treatment at the individual level, okay, which does not affect the network. So somehow the network is, predetermined, for instance. Then this assumption will hold.
Isn't there a small issue of double counting because the yj includes the xj inside? So you are counting the xj twice, and the question
Indeed.
is whether it comes in the delta part or the beta part,
right.
You can move it around and still have the same thing. So how do you resolve
that? No, because the way the xj enters into the yj, is through the same equation for yj, right? And you're actually getting at the way identification will work here. Okay. It's still very structured by this linear in means, formulation. So indeed, xj enters twice, right? Indeed. Okay. So hold on to that thought. And
can I ask you?
Sure.
But going back to your example where x is gender and y is the phenomena you're acoustic, like smoking. So this formulation doesn't seem to capture the effect. Suppose I have half women friends, half male friends, but I'm affected more by women.
Indeed. So this would be,
You do not capture
yep.
this.
No, not in this benchmark formulation. So you have to extend this a bit, and this is, being done.
Yes, it will be a vector, then you can do it.
Right. So
Different cognitive.
you may have, different parameters for different, for your male peers and your female peers. Okay. So this is an extension. Okay. Not in the benchmark model, indeed. So you have these two kinds of peer effects. Researchers, for some reason, are often focused or even are obsessed about endogenous peer effects. One reason being that it's only the endogenous peer effects which gives rise to what's called the social multiplier. I'll get back to this. Okay. So the social multiplier is the idea that if everyone gets some shock, because of the feedbacks in the system, the original shock gets amplified by the social interactions. Okay. So you don't get a social multiplier through the contextual peer effects. However, in many concrete contexts, these contextual peer effects matter a lot. For instance, you may know that there are heated debates on, the impact of gender composition in the classroom and whether it's a good idea to have, only female classroom and only male classroom. This is, about contextual peer effects. Now, so in the previous model, we assumed that, all the other endogeneity problems were solved. If you have multiple networks and some data sets that Matt was discussing, have this kind of structure like AdHealth with, where you have a number of schools or number of villages, you can, in this benchmark model, partially control for correlated effects in this way. So suppose that links are only located within this predetermined group, which is a big assumption, because there are links across schools or across villages as well, but you have to assume this if you want this to work. Then you can essentially just include group fixed effects in the previous model. So you replace the intercept by, group level fixed effect. And potentially this group fixed effect can be correlated with the network and with, the covariates. And then, but of course for the model to work, you have to assume that conditional on these fixed effects, so everything is exogenous. So what this does is that it absorbs the common shocks at the level of the group. In terms of network endogeneity, it says something like selection works as if, so for instance for school, everything that matters for this, selection in peer groups happens on the choice of school, but then within schools, things are more or less random, conditional on the school. Okay. Whether it's a good assumption in practice or not, we still don't really know, because we still lack studies that compare this kind of estimations with, pure randomized. So this is one thing that would be nice to do for.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by this being sufficient. What
so does it control well for the problem of correlated effects? Okay, or not? The problem is the problem of network endogeneity.
Whether you need anything else in addition.
Yes. So in other words, is it true that, conditional on the school, for instance, links formed within schools are more or less random, at least with respect to what you're trying to explain? Okay. I guess the general answer is it's probably not sufficient. Okay, because, however, to be sure about this, we would need to have studies that contrast, one estimation where everything is randomized, for instance, and one where you're applying this methodology, or or some kind of test for network endogeneity, and we are not quite there yet. So, and it will depend on the context in any case. Okay, so what is the reflection problem? One way to see it is that outcomes in this simple model are simultaneously determined, right? So yi depends on yj, and yj depends on yi. Okay. So you cannot simply regress yi on the outcomes of your peers, because even if all these standard endogeneity problems have been solved, the outcomes of your peers, it's an endogenous variable, simply due to the structure of the model. because your own error term will be correlated to the outcomes of your peers. So this is actually a particular case of, linear simultaneous equation, which is one of the oldest, kind of equations in econometrics. And it's also formally similar to the best replies of a game, right? Because my outcome, my action depends on the actions of the others. So to address simultaneity in this kind of model, you have to compute what's called the reduced form, which is how y depends on, covariates, parameters, and errors. So this is equivalent in a game interpretation to solving for the Nash equilibria of the game. Now, for a minute, let's get back to the Mansky's original setup. So in Mansky's original setup, people are organized in groups, and the mean is computed by including yourself in the mean. I'm calling this inclusive mean. It's a weird specification, and empirical researchers typically exclude the individual from the mean, even in group setups. This turns out to play a critical role, but you'll have to wait a few slides. So this is equivalent to the original Mansky's equations. So now we have this model where x bar and y bar are the mean of x or y within the group. Okay. So to compute the reduced form, simply take the mean of this equation over everyone in the group. We get this. Now you can isolate y bar, and you can express y bar. And you see that y bar, so the expectation of y bar is a linear function of x bar. And then you plug back y bar in the original equation. This is the reduced form. Okay. So, and this can be estimated, right? So you can regress y on, a constant xi and x bar. Yeah.
So if you got rid of the x's, beta would just be 1, right? So what else are we getting out of this?
So if you get rid of the
So
x's,
if you just did the regression of yi on the group mean,
right.
Then
Yeah, but then it's kind of tautological. I mean, it doesn't tell you anything, right?
so then when you put in the group mean y bar, it's only because of the addition of the x's.
Yeah. Correct. Okay. So you can regress this, meaning that you can recover these parameters. Okay? And what you notice here is that from these estimations, here with one characteristic, you will recover 3 parameters. And there is no way from these 3 parameters to get back at the 4 original parameters. Okay? So Mansky calls this a composite, peer effect. It mixes, the contextual and the endogenous. So we can still detect whether some peer effect is going on, but we don't know the origin of the peer effect. Okay? So that's.
What did you say? You're saying suppose you fitted the last equation.
Yes.
Then you're estimating for the 3 parameters. Right?
Yes. You're estimating these 3.
But how about the equation before that? Wasn't that also? Oh no, it's.
It won't help you. It's not. They're linked.
You can increase delta and decrease beta and get the same effect, essentially.
No,
Not exactly.
You're estimating. No, we're not exactly.
Not linearly, but because the effect comes in through 2 channels, directly through the delta and also through the y bar that comes through the beta. So you have the same effect of x coming in those two places. And you cannot separate. And that was what I was
Okay. So if you want, part of the problem is that y bar is perfectly collinear, in expectation with x bar. It's linearly related to x bar. Okay? So we have a collinearity. That's another way to see it. We have a collinearity, perfect collinearity problem in the original equation. Okay? So now let's get to the network interactions. So denoted by G, the interaction matrix. It's not the adjacency matrix, it's 1 over Ni if I is affected by G. So in matrix term, you can write the structural equation like this. Okay. Then how do we compute the reduced form? So we simply, isolate y. And then if I minus beta g is invertible, we can take the inverse. And this is the reduced form. Okay. So notice a few things here. First, this is related to the Bonacic centrality machinery that Ben was telling you about yesterday. So more or less, anytime you have, these linear network models, they're related to Bonacic centrality and they have similar kinds of properties. Another thing that you can notice here is that the social multiplier, so so notice this part here, alpha over 1 minus beta. So this comes from the fact that in this linear in-means models, because the matrix is row stochastic, and if no one is isolated, so everyone is affected by someone else, anytime you have a common shock to the original, outcome, it's transformed into 1 over 1 minus beta. So no matter the network, a common shock to every agent, gets, because of the equilibrium effect, if you want, transformed is magnified by 1 over 1 minus beta. Beta is typically lower than 1 in magnitude. Okay, so you get a greater effect. This is the social multiplier part. And now we have this part, which expresses how y depends on x. It's a linear model, but this is non-linear in the parameters, and especially in beta, right? It's linear in gamma and delta. So we say that this model is identified if this function, this matrix, is injective in the parameters. Okay? Meaning that if two of these matrices are the same, it must be that the original parameters are the same. Okay? In other words, no two different sets of parameters can give you the same reduced form. Okay? This is the usual notion of identification in systems of simultaneous linear equations. And one thing to notice here is that it's based on the first moment of the econometric model only. We're not using what's going on the error term, except, under the assumption that the error term is of, conditional expectation 0. But there are things to do with the error term.
And the dependence on the x.
Yes. So conditional on the x's and the network, right? So the regressors and the Pierce variable are exogenous. So so we're in the best of the world here. And we still might have problem, which is what this reflection problem is about.
Jan, quick question.
Yeah.
What is I missed the input of the fact that you wrote on the board.
Well, I was explaining this term, and which it is related to the social multiplier. So if you have a common shock, a common shock a priori, for instance, due to some intervention, two outcomes, it gets multiplied by 1 minus beta in the end. Okay. So one way to view this identification is as follows, right? If we had ideal data, could we recover the structural parameters or not? If it's not identified, you cannot, no matter the data. Okay.
So the issue, so when you didn't have a network, really the matrix G, I minus beta G was not invertible, because it was really a zero matrix, because all the rows would be identical. So
No, it depends on beta and with
assume that you don't have a network structure, but everybody influences everybody else.
Yes.
We did 2 slides ago.
Yeah.
That will correspond to all the rows being identical.
Yeah, but
One
it's still
over n,
invertible.
1 over n.
Yeah, so I'm treating this case in a minute, right? So G would be, so 1 over n everywhere.
Yes. So then that is never going to be invertible.
No, it will be, because what matters is I minus beta G, okay? So it's generically invertible, okay? The set of betas for which it's not invertible is of full measure no matter G. Well, except if G is 0. But.
No.
So what
You
matters
mean-
is
no,
I minus B.
You mean that times gamma I plus delta G to be able to invert and find the gamma, delta, and the beta. I didn't mean invert, sorry. I didn't mean...
You meant
want the whole
injective.
expression. Okay. You want to invert that and to determine beta, gamma, and delta.
Right.
And I think if that's a matrix, you can never do that. Is that correct? Or
So you're getting at Minsky's result. You're totally correct. And I'm coming in 2 slides, I'm getting back to the groups. Okay. You're totally correct. In the group case, it doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah, because it's not because the rows are different. You can
Yeah.
you can get it because it's not
Usually, so that's indeed. So you're a bit ahead, but that's exactly why with networks things will work out. So I clarified with 2 co-authors identification conditions in this setup. So if this matrix is invertible and if delta plus beta gamma is not 0, so without group fixed effects, the model is identified if and only if I, G, and G square are linearly independent. And with group fixed effects, it's identified if and only if I, G, G square, and G to the 3 are linearly independent. So what are these conditions? So essentially, these are rank conditions, right? Which is not surprising because we're talking about identification in linear systems. IgG square linearly independent simply means that there is no, linear relationship between the 3 matrices that is equal to 0. Okay. So, and this result is actually not too hard to show. Starting from this and, writing the conditions for injectivity and, seeing what this means. Yeah.
So the diagonal element, GII is equal to 0 or small GII?
So I think this holds for any matrix actually. So I think it holds for any. So you could have GI non-zero. Yeah.
And the G, the matrix,
So no, it's not because it's an interaction matrix. Someone who has only one friend, is affected fully by him. So the mean among his friends is just the outcome of his friend. But if this friend has 10 friends, he's only affected 1/10 by the original. Okay? So it's not symmetric. So what are these powers of matrices? I mean, we saw them before already. So G square is about the friends of friends interactions, right? In particular, G square ij is strictly positive if and only if there is some k such that I is affected by k and k is affected by j. Okay? So the main idea behind the result, and I think that's a powerful idea because it will hold even in other contexts, is that the characteristics of friends who are not direct friends affect my outcomes only through the impact of my friends' outcomes. Okay. So let's say this again. So if we see statistically that people 2 steps away from me in the network, their characteristics affect me, it can only go through the effect of my friends. Of course, this is true only because of the structure we imposed. Okay, but still, I think it's an important idea. So then, these characteristics of people 2 steps away can be used to instrument for friends' outcomes in the original equations. So one way to see this is that, if you start from the original, structural equation, Waitoni matrix form, just multiply by G, we get this. So this is the friends' outcomes, so you see G square appearing. So G square of X affects G of Y, but by assumption, it doesn't appear in the original equation. Okay. So actually, IV techniques can be used, concretely to implement these ideas. You can also do maximum likelihood, and it's related to special econometric techniques. Okay. Of course, this works if G square is not a linear combination of I and G, which gets to the.
And in the original group problem, it was.
Yeah. So we're getting there in the next slide. Yeah.
So if I have a slight measurement error in my network matrix, so that I list that friends of my friends are also my friends, that automatically poses a serious problem for my instrument.
Indeed, measurement error are an issue. It's an understudied topic. Unfortunately, it's not one I was planning on telling you about today, but part of the reason is that there is so much on it, you know. Arun Chandrasekhar had his job market paper on it, and we all want to know what is going on with this paper, because it's an important issue. Indeed, so there are, indeed, so some measurement problems are not some measurement issues are not a problem, some are. What is problematic here, of course, is that if you know, some of the observed friends are your direct friends, then the exclusion restriction is violated. Okay. Now, with group fixed effects, what do we get this power of 3 in the condition? With group fixed effects, to identify the model, you have to consider variables in deviation, as in panel estimation, you know, to remove the fixed effects. And then when you do this in deviation, essentially you have to go one step further in the network. Now, still a bit more networks, and I'm getting to the group. So essentially, this identification condition is very easy to satisfy. There are several ways to see it. First, you can easily show that identification holds if the diameter of the network is greater than or equal to 3. So if you have at least 2 agents who are 3 steps away at distance 3 in the network, it's identified. Okay. So essentially, in any complex networks, you know, it works. Identification does fail for some interesting networks of diameter 2, not all of them. And when I say fail here, it's a condition with a power 3. So when you really want to control for, you know, these common shocks. Now, here is a list. It's the exhaustive list of undirected networks for which identification fails for 4, 5, and 6. So we couldn't get, you know, a general geometric characterization. So, you know, it's why this? But, you know, you see like the circle with 4 and 5 doesn't work. But then after, above 6, it works.
One of the cases where I, G squared, G cubed are not are dependent.
Exactly. Okay. Those of you who have never seen this before, there is one family of networks that doesn't work. I don't know if you can catch it just from this picture. So, well, stars never work, which, you know, but it's a more general family. Complete, you're missing one term. So complete, sure, complete it's a group, you know, it won't work. Complete bipartite, okay. So it turns out, you know, that for complete bipartite graphs, this equation holds. Who knows why, but you know. Okay, so you can check. So, well, first, this result could be useful to design lab experiments because, you know, in the lab, you can actually, and people are starting to do, you know, these lab experiments with network games, network effects, and, you know, this may be helpful if you want to identify things to avoid, you know, the networks that don't work. More generally, I believe that the main importance of the result is not there. It's about the fact that even when it's identified, the strength of identification will very much depend on the structure. And by strength of identification, because, you know, a model can be identified but very weakly identified, meaning that the precision of the estimates you get is not good, right? You get big standard errors, potentially a large bias. Okay. So this is an issue that has actually not been systematically studied yet. In the original paper, we had some Monte Carlo simulations, and we had weird things going on, interesting things.
Can you say, roughly speaking, when you expect a network will give strong identification?
So we looked for this, and we didn't find all the simple conjectures we had on based on this friends of friends idea, and they don't work. You have non-monotonicities. They don't work. So I don't know. Presumably, when you have more of these exclusion restrictions, you have more people further away, and it's better, but it's not as simple as that. And there could be some theory here being done for any of you who is interested in econometric theory, because you have explicit formulas for the asymptotic variance, in maximum likelihood estimations, for instance. So we do have explicit formulas for these standard errors as a function of the network, but yeah.
If someone sees friends of friends as a potential friend, he will be influenced a lot by them, even though they don't influence their friends in topics like
Sure. Potentially.
smoking, etc.
Sure, what you're saying is that essentially the model may be misspecified, and friends of friends may have some direct influence on your outcome. I agree with you. One remark is that here, of course, you could go further away in the network if you're a bit worried about this issue. There is a trade-off. So you could use, characteristics of people 5 steps away, right? There is a trade-off because then the first stage in the instrument, is much weaker. So there is a trade-off. But yeah, you're right. Now, let's get back to groups and let's see, and that was the first thing we did when we understood this property. Let's check that we get the Mansky result out of the condition. So under inclusive means, G is like this, and you can check that G square is equal to G. Okay, so we are right in the, so IG and G square are linearly dependent. It's not identified. Now, here is something that we didn't expect, and that is still surprising to me, even after having thought, I don't know how many years about this. Now, this inclusive mean is definitely not the preferred specification. Typically, in empirical specifications, people use the leave-out mean or exclusive mean. Okay, well, you assume you don't double count you, right? So you don't consider yourself as part of your peer group. You're already there, in the individual characteristics. So now G has a slightly different shape. We have zeros on the diagonal, 1 over n minus 1 outside. So when you do the computation, you get, G square is still linearly dependent. Okay, so identification doesn't work with one group. However, you see n emerging in this relation. Okay, and then what you can easily show is that with 2 different sizes, and a network composed of 2 groups of different sizes, so block diagonal matrix, IG and G squares now become linearly independent. And for group fixed effects and to get power of 3, you need 3 different sizes. But then the theorem tells you that it's identified. It turns out that this was first shown, so not with the conditions we have, but as in a paper by Longfei Li in the Journal of Econometrics. And this is an extremely surprising result. Extremely. What this says is that essentially, so you have no identification whatsoever with inclusive means. Okay? But you have full identification when you leave the individual out of the mean in a group context. So to rephrase it, when agents interact in group, forget about networks, the usual classroom setup, we can allow for common shock at the classroom level that we get rid of. We can detect true peer effects, and we can solve for the reflection problem. Okay? So it's weird. It seems to contradict Mansky, and it seems to contradict common econometric sense. So we explored this further, and we actually applied it to some data on academic achievement in Quebec, in a paper published in the Journal of Applied Econometrics.
Has Mansky responded to this?
Yeah, so he's aware of...
What does he say?
So, the math are correct. So, the math are correct. identification is weird. So most people will think it relies on the functional form. You know, it's not really. And Mansky is not really working on these models anymore in any case. So I don't really have the time to enter into details, but we thought hard about why, because Longfellow showed the results, but didn't really discuss intuition, and why are these models identified, what is going on. We thought hard about this, and I'm not,
Sorry, but that's only if you have groups of different sizes.
Yes, you need,
So that's not what Mansky was talking. He was talking about one group, no? Or he was talking also about having.
You could have any different sizes in his setup.
Because that's crucial.
Because G square is equal to G under the inclusive mean. So even if you have, many different sizes.
Simultaneously in the same model.
So in his original model, you could have different sizes. Okay. So I'm now quite convinced that there is some semi-parametric identification principle at work behind, which is as follows. So under this leave-out mean, you have some mechanical effect. But mechanical effect is good for identification. Agents with a higher x, say a higher grade at entry, have peers with a lower x. Okay. It's mechanic, right? So if you're the top in your class, all the others are below you. If you're the lowest in your class, all the others are above you. Okay. So this perfect negative correlation actually reduces the difference in outcomes between two agents, right? Because your peers, the quality of your peers, if you want, varies in the other direction from your own, mechanically. And this reduction in the difference is mechanically I think the reduction is larger in smaller groups. I think this is a typo. So I'm still confused even after 5 years. Sorry? Yeah, sure. But with negative peer effects, you get the opposite, You still get this size effect in the opposite direction. So this reduction, it's higher in magnitude in smaller groups. The typo here. So, and so this can be used. So of course, the critical assumption here is that the peer coefficients do not vary with the group size. But, but of course, we know that size, especially in classrooms, size, we have lots of size effects. So if somehow the peer effects depend on size, this cannot work. But if you're ready to assume that they don't, this can work. Okay, well, I think this is worth exploring further because it may be a trick, as some very good applied economists told me once. But, it's an important issue, so all tricks are welcome. Now, let's get to the key limitations of this model. We've discussed some already, and current directions of research. So I had to make some choice. So I chose 3 limitations. One is nonlinearities. So this is very much a linear model. Second is unknown networks. It's a bit related to the issue of measurement error in links. And, third and probably most importantly, the issue of network endogeneity. There are many other important issues that I wasn't planning to discuss, but I'm happy to talk with you about offline, sampling and measurement errors, second moments, what's going on. The error term can be used to identify things, multiple outcomes, asymptotic theory. Matt was mentioning this earlier. There are issues with laws of large numbers of networks, right? And there is some interesting work being done currently on this. So let's start with nonlinearities. So first remark is that introducing nonlinearities in the effect of Peirce characteristics in the contextual peer effect is relatively easy, okay? And indeed, and people do it all the time. What's harder from a methodological point of view is introducing nonlinearities in the effects of Peirce outcomes. Okay? Because Y now solves, a nonlinear fixed point system. When you write Y as a nonlinear function of the y of the others. There may be no solution. Even if there is always a solution, there may be multiple solutions. In the language of the econometricians working on games, the model is incomplete. So you have to specify either some kind of selection process or to do, set identification. So this then relates these questions to the econometrics of games. It's a very active literature. Oreo De Paula has a nice survey on it, if you're interested. And indeed, Oreo also has some current papers on peer effects and networks related to this. So now, there is still much to do here. There has not been much, extension of this linear and means model trying to get at the non-linearities in the endogenous effect. Okay. In some cases, it's relatively easy to extend the model. So as with, so for instance, my co-author Bernard Fortin and a student have a current working paper where they allow for gender-specific, So they take the benchmark model and they say men and women, may be affected differently by covariates, by their peers. So essentially, you end up with a model with 4 different endogenous peer effects. Okay, and this is relatively easy to do. Now, there is one kind of situation where you cannot avoid nonlinearities, which is when you want to explain discrete, especially binary, or bounded outcomes. Okay, and so I came to econometrics late, and I realized that the econometrics of discrete outcomes is very different in nature from the econometrics of continuous outcomes. So suppose, for instance, that you want to explain a binary outcome, say smoking, and this, where you summarize smoking by I'm a smoker, I'm not a smoker. So a natural extension. So you have to take into account this binary nature. Okay. One natural extension of the benchmark model would be as follows. Related to this logit and probit kind of models, you have some, latent variable which could denote the relative utility of smoking, which is, as before, which depends on, smoking rates among your friends, proportion of girls, or, average, socioeconomic characteristics of your friends, your own covariates. And then, if this latent variable is positive, you're a smoker, otherwise you're not a smoker. Okay? So this model has not been studied or applied yet. It's quite a simple, extension. It's just taking linear and means to binary outcomes. Has not. It has been looked at in a group context in this very interesting paper by Kurman and Sutwan in the Journal of Applied Econometrics, but not to networks. One remark here is that so now you have multiple equilibria, and you have to deal with them. Okay? So if beta is positive, essentially this is formally equivalent to the best reply of a supermodular game played on networks. So we can use all the machinery from supermodular games. Solutions always exist. They form this nice lattice structure. We have fast algorithm to compute the extreme equilibria. Okay? So there are things to do here. But it has not been done in a network context. Yeah?
Actually, in industrial organizations, using this
Okay.
just connected to starting Walmart, Kmart, exactly use this.
Okay, so in IO, apparently there are some papers with related structures. Do they have this network kind of? Okay. Interesting. So I don't know about these papers. Okay, so there is already an Econometrica paper on this. Forget about it. Just do something else. Now, what has been done, in a social network context is this. So notice that in this extension I was proposing you before, agents observe the Y of their peers. Okay. So essentially, this corresponds to a game of complete information if you want to have a game interpretation of this equation. Now, an alternative assumption would be to say that you don't observe, the choices of your peer when you make your decision. And now this ties the model back to incomplete info model. Under group interactions, this kind of setup has been looked at by Brock and Durloff in a famous paper on Review of Economic Studies. And their framework has been extended to networks recently in a paper published by Longfellow and Coulter in the Review of Economics and Statistics. Okay? What I find interesting, I don't have, actually I do have a clear preference between complete and incomplete info, but what I find interesting is that these two frameworks have very deep differences. In particular, and so under incomplete information in these papers, if the endogenous peer effect is small enough, you have a unique solution. Somehow the fixed point function is contracting, you have a unique solution. Okay? So under some assumptions, you don't have to deal with multiplicity. In my preferred extension of the benchmark model, it's not the case. Even if beta is arbitrarily small, you will always have a range with multiple solutions. I have this in research notes if you're interested. I don't have a paper on this. But so, so the range of multiplicity shrinks, when beta decreases, but it's always there. So deep differences, I don't know if, in the IO literature, is there a literature on, which kind of assumption is more appropriate? I don't know if we're there yet. But this is a choice you have to make when you want to estimate peer effect with binary outcomes. And, it's not an innocuous choice. And I don't know about methodologies that could tell you which choice is more appropriate.
Sorry, choice?
Between complete and incomplete information. Okay? They give you two very different econometrics models. I didn't write, the one you get here, but they're different. Okay. Now here is a second issue and limitation and current direction of research. Suppose that we only have partial information on the network, or potentially we don't even observe the network, but we know that there is some network going on that explains the peer effect. What can we do? So let me tell you a bit about what some recent papers have been doing on this. So Larry Bloom, William Brock, Stephen Durloff, and Coulter have this recent paper in JPE, where they obtained some interesting identification results. So they assume that the interaction matrices for endogenous and contextual peer effects first are weighted, so you have different weights. And second, they may differ, so it's kind of an extension of the benchmark model. And then they show that if we don't know the weights on these matrices, but if we know the zeros, if we know who does not affect whom, okay? But for the non-zeros, you could have strong or weak, impacts. And, under some additional assumptions, the coefficients that we care about, these beta, gamma, and delta, in particular the peer effects coefficients, can be identified. Okay? So even if you have very partial information of this weighted network, you can still identify things. It's related to the fact that, of course, when you work on identification in these simultaneous models, exclusion restrictions are really key, right? So somehow knowing that I am not affected by some specific agents in the population is more useful for identification than knowing that I am affected by someone. Okay. Totally theoretical at this stage. Whether this can be brought to data is a bit unclear. But no, yeah.
What are they able to identify about the network?
So they don't talk about this, but you can identify the parameters.
Yeah. And
I don't think they discuss this in their paper. The papers I'm going to discuss right now are about also identifying the network. Yeah.
So do they need some more restrictions, such as that the averages apply back? So
Do they need some more restrictions?
So they're identifying that you know who doesn't interact with whom, but if you have, for example, you have a classroom model where it's all black and white, that case still works under their
So I think you can have a classroom model in the contextual peer effects, but not in the endogenous peer effect.
you can't have a classroom model in both cases.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah. Now, recently, researchers have been working on panel data, and there are some interesting papers out there showing that with sufficiently long panel and under some assumptions, the parameters and the network can be identified. So even if you don't know the network, you can actually recover it from the data. Okay? There is an interesting working paper by Manresa on this. She essentially considers the following model. So if you want, it's an extension of the benchmark model in a panel setup. So now outcome depends on individual and time. There are some individual fixed effects. Covariate, which is the effect can be individual specific in a panel context. And now all the peer effects in our model are here. So first remark is that there is no endogenous peer effect. It just focuses on contextual peer effects. And the GIJs are weighted. So she mixes parameters and networks, because since the network is weighted, so GIJ is the impact of J's characteristic on I's outcome. Okay?
Is the summation of GIJ on J1 or not necessarily?
Sorry?
Is the summation of GIJ on J1 or not necessarily? It's an average or not?
Not necessarily. It could be any kind of weight. So it's not a linear in means model anymore. Okay? So no restriction on the GIJ. Okay? So she does assume two key things. One is that the network is stable over time. Okay, obviously, if the network changes, at every period, you can not do much. So G doesn't change. And second, the network is sparse, and more precisely, is sparse relative to the length, to the time length of the panel. So for any agent, the number of peers he has, is always much lower than the time period. And then under these two conditions, she shows that parameters and the GIJs are identified. And it's not a pure theoretical paper. I mean, she proposes an estimator based on lasso, for those of you who are familiar with this kind of techniques. And she actually implements this estimator on data on R&D spillovers between firms in the US. Okay, so this is an interesting idea. Oreo De Paola is currently working on this, if you're interested. He considers adding endogenous peer effects to the mix. So they have a working paper that they don't.
Is that also lasso?
So what do they do? I think so. No, I know there is another team. If someone, if people among you are interested, there is another team that works with different estimators from Toulouse. They don't have a working paper yet, but I think Oreo is also working with Lasso. Okay. But adding endogenous peer effects complicates quite a bit the picture. Okay. Now, let's get to, maybe the most important limitation. So in most applications, the network is endogenous. And even if you have a randomized treatment, this is a prime for identification in these models. Okay. The network itself is endogenous and affected by the treatment. Okay. If it's not affected by the treatment, I think you're fine. But if it is affected, now you have at least two types of endogeneity here that are problematic. Maybe there are other types, you'll tell me, but these are the two types that have been looked at in the literature so far. One is that we may have some common unobservables affecting both outcomes and links. Okay. And another one is that outcomes and links may be jointly determined in some joint choice. So in other words, the links may depend on outcomes themselves. So smoking, so here if you want, maybe there is some kind of propensity to smoke. I don't know. wanting to be cool or whatever, that will affect both, you know, the likelihood that you end up smoking and the links you form. Here, smoking could actually, you know, directly impact your links. Okay? So I think conceptually there are different types of endogeneity, and that in any case they have been studied in different kinds of frameworks so far. Now, in a recent paper, Guido Imbens and a student have proposed, you know, a joint model of outcomes and links, published in the Journal of Business and Economic Statistics. There is a special issue on peer effects and networks, with comments published by some people in this audience, if you're interested. So essentially, here is our framework. Outcomes are determined very much by the benchmark model I presented, you know, this linear means with contextual and endogenous peer effects. And then he also proposes a model of network formation. In this paper, he has a very simple model based on dyadic regressions. So the logistic kind of model that Matt was mentioning, where, you know, you explain every link more or less independently on the other link. So every link is explained as a function of the characteristics of the nodes without accounting for, you know, structural network effects. Okay? So the key innovation in their paper is that they assume that there is some binary unobservable, xi, which enters into both, you know, equations. So they assume that it enters linearly into the outcome equation. So this peer effects equation, they just put some, you know, alpha times alpha xi times xi. And then in these dyadic regressions where they explain, you know, link by link, they assume that, you know, the absolute value of the differences between, you know, the unobservables between the two agents affect the link. Okay, so in other words, they model homophily on unobservables in link formation. This is what they do. And then they estimate their model, you know, jointly. And they apply this to add health data using Bayesian methods. So a few remarks on what they do. First, it's computationally very demanding. So you could not bring this to, you know, 1,000 nodes. So essentially, in the applications, they work on one school with 500 students. And apparently already, you know, took them a long time to get the estimates. They find that this unobserved similarity that they put in the model matters for link formation, but somehow doesn't change the estimates of the peer effects, which, you know, is quite surprising, and which is quite surprising. So I think it's an interesting paper because it was the first paper to actually try to do, you know, this joint network formation, peer effects in networks estimation in a way that is supposed to be able to correct for the network, the endogeneity of the network. But there are many limitations to what they do. The unobservables is binary, you know, it seems a bit coarse. They don't put any contextual peer effects on the unobservables, which is weird. You know, if observables have contextual peer effects, why would unobservables not? And I had a discussion with Alan in the room, who is working on these issues right now. It's actually unclear that their model can generate biases in peer effect regressions. This is very problematic because, you know, if the model itself cannot generate biases, clearly you will not be able to unbias what's going on in the data. The reason is that to generate biases, you want somehow these unobservables to be correlated with the peer variables in your peer estimation. But here, these unobservables just, you know, change. They are not directly related to, for instance, you know, the level of covariates among your peers. It's very indirect. So, well, in any case, it's a very active area of research. Longfellow has a recent paper in the Journal of Applied Econometrics. Essentially, it does the same thing but he relaxes the assumption that unobservables are binary. And, you know, when this psi I, you model it as a sum of several continuous error terms, At some point, peer effect estimate change. Okay, so there is something going on here. Maybe you need, to model these unobserved things in a better way to be able to correct for the endogeneity. Eleonora Patacchini has a working paper, and Alan Griffith in the audience has his job market paper on related issues. Yeah.
Second supplement in the first the unobserved similarity matters. Is that a statement about their...
So that's what they get in the results.
Okay, so that's the surprising part.
Yeah, so it's quite surprising that they do find, that this unobserved similarity, matters for information, but somehow the peer effect relations are not affected. With respect to a model where you just neglect this endogeneity and you just do the peer effect regression. Yeah. Now, some other recent papers have taken another angle to this, endogenous network issue. In particular, Badev has a recent working paper where he proposes a model where agents simultaneously choose some action. So he applies this to smoking, right? So smoke or not, and your binary links. So he has this, big game modeling, everything. So if the network is fixed, this is actually an extension of the benchmark model to binary outcomes. If the actions are fixed, it's a not uninteresting model of network formation. It incorporates reciprocity, common friends. So this model will generate clustering, okay, and homophily on actions. So it does incorporate lots of things we want to have in network formation models. Now, of course, the problem is how do you estimate this kind of models? It's not that easy. So what he does essentially is that he builds on earlier ideas, and he builds an estimation framework based on a potential function. It's quite interesting, actually, because it's if you want, evolutionary game theory meeting econometrics, in a way. So to my knowledge, the first paper that does this in a peer effect framework is this paper by Nakajima. So the way this works is that you have this game, okay? And in a way, you want to generate a likelihood from this game to be able to bring it to data. So one thing you do is that you assume some kind of stochastic best replies process on the game. So some people is chosen at random. He plays the best reply with some error. And you do it in a way that generates, a Markov chain. And then you use the steady state distribution of the Markov chain as your likelihood to bring to the data. Okay. And when there is a potential, so you can do it you can do this without a potential. If there is one, you have a nice formula for the likelihood. A nice formula, but it's actually very hard to estimate, and we are getting to the estimation problems that Matt was mentioning earlier. This model is related to the Ergums models. You have has to use, simulated likelihood Monte Carlo Markov chain techniques. There are convergence problems. So, but it's the state of the art, Vincent Boucher, a former student of mine, has an interesting recent paper in the Journal of Public Economics where he develops somewhat related models with continuous rather than binary actions. So, to conclude on this endogenous network issue, properly accounting for network endogeneity is a first-order issue, okay? And we are not quite there yet in how to deal with this in a convincing way. It's a very active area of research. And this is where, peer effects meets network formation and the econometrics of network formation. Okay. To me, there are two limitations of existing frameworks. First, everything that people have been doing so far is computationally very demanding. So it's not scalable. You cannot bring this to large networks. And maybe what is more problematic, although it might be related, identification is black box, right? So in a way, these are the first, true structural econometric papers with networks, but the way it's done at this stage is that we don't know what's going on. Okay, we don't know what features of the data is actually used to unbias. It works in the sense that the whole machinery looks good and it gives you estimates, and in some cases it changes the estimates from the peer effects regressions. But what is going on, we don't know. I think so. The better, structural econometric papers I know have a very clear, identification, view of what's going on in identification. I think in the best of cases, you have identified, the principles at work in the identification. And then, of course, the structure always helps, but it's not just the structure as a black box. It's, the structure built around some clear principles. Okay, this is a bit abstract when I say it like this, but so for instance, Adam Ziedel has a paper on learning in networks that he will probably talk about, which I think is related to this. I don't know if you will present it in your lecture, but there is a very clear identification in the reduced form, but then they bring a structural model, on top of this. So ideally, we want a model that gives us not unrealistic networks, so essentially meaning at this stage that generates clustering, which dyadic regressions do not give you, where identification is clear, that we can bring to large networks. Should it address all types of endogeneity? I'm not totally sure about what I think about this at this stage, but why not, if it can? Okay. So here is where we need to go. Okay, so to conclude the lecture, I wanted to tell you about a very interesting paper. Some of you might know it. Hopefully many of you don't, otherwise we can have lunch now. Which is interesting in many, many respects. So if you're, interested at all in networks, I think you should read that paper. The paper published by Scott Carrell, Bruce Sacerdote, and West in Econometrica 2013. So essentially, what do? They want to study academic achievement among, freshmen entering the U.S. Air Force Academy. This is the Academy of, Air Force officers. So they developed their study in three stages. First, they study some nonlinear peer effects going on among these students. Okay. Second, from their study of nonlinear peer effects, they design and implement changes in the ways groups are formed at entry in the academy. With the idea, they don't do this at random, of course. They want to harness the peer effects because they have some objective in mind. And third, they evaluate their intervention. Okay, whether so it's an exercise in social design, if you want. Okay. So first, on the pre-treatment study of peer effects, so the main feature of the US Air Force Academy is that at entry, students are randomly assigned to squadrons of size about 30. Okay, so it's one of these papers about random peers. So from this random assignment, you can get causal estimates of peer effects. And essentially, in the language I've been developing in the talk, they estimate nonlinear contextual peer effects models. They forget about endogenous peer effects. And they find differentiated impacts of peers' SAT scores on individual GPA, right? So the SAT scores are, so I never went through the SAT test, but I guess many of you are familiar with it. It's a test that you have to go through, before getting into university. And they have all the administrative data on the students. So they know everything you can know about, students before they enter into the academy. And then individual GPA is essentially GPA after 1 year of study at the academy. Okay. So from this study, they find that low ability students benefit most from having high ability peers in the squadron, and again, they measure ability through these SAT scores. Okay. So they group students in three, so the first third, median third, and last third as ranked by SAT scores, and then they do their peer effect estimations for these different categories. So low ability students benefit most from having high ability peers, middle and high ability, this should be students in this sentence. We don't see an effect on them. And also middle ability students seem to suffer the most from having low ability peers, while the low ability peers don't seem to impact high and low ability students. So this should be students. There is a typo first. This should be students here and here. So they look at the different effects of having more or less low or high ability peers on you, depending on your SAT score. Okay, on your SAT score. So essentially, they find that low ability students, it's very beneficial for them to be in a group with high ability peers. Not so much for if you're not low ability. And then they also look at the impact of having low ability peers, and so middle ability students suffer from being with low ability peers. If you compare a group with lots of low ability with a group of
High ability have effect on low ability, but not on anything else.
Yeah.
And low ability have effect
Have a
on
neg-
middle and not on anything else.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Okay, that's what they find. Okay, that's what they find. Then what do they do with this finding? So essentially, they coordinate with the direction of the academy, okay, with the goal of improving the grades of the low ability students. Okay. So how do you improve the grades of the low ability students in this? So before it was more or less random, right? The grouping. So the groups were, of course with some variation, but had a mix of low, middle, and high. Now, to maximize the peer effects on low ability students, to maximize the grade on low ability students, given their finding, essentially you need to create two types of squadrons. And they actually implement a maximization algorithm that speeds this, but it makes sense given what they find. So you need to create bimodal squadrons with lots of low and lots of high, and homogeneous middle ability type squadrons. Okay. Because then the low ability students, can get all these nice peer effects from the high ability students, and it won't change. So given their pre-treatment estimate, the change they implemented was supposed to increase GPA for low ability students from 2.34 to 2.39. So is it a big increase or not? I don't know, but it's without changing the GPA on middle and high ability students. Okay?
Shouldn't this also increase the middle GPAs because they're not being matched with lows anymore?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I know it puzzled me as well.
By the low.
Middle affects by low.
Middles were affected by low.
So I think if you take my summary of the results at face value, I think you're correct. So I don't know why, it might have to do with the specific estimates and, standard errors, and I don't know why, but you're right, that's a question. So what they did is that during 2 years, half of the cohort was assigned to control and was still grouped as before, in these random squadrons.
How many squadrons you have per year?
Okay, good questions. How many squadrons you have? I think something like 40 or... 40, yeah. Or a bit less, no? 30? Yeah, maybe 30, okay. So I could check, yeah. So during 2 years, they, split the cohort in half, the entering cohort. Half was in control group, as before, these random groups. Half was, treated with this, bimodal and middle squadrons. So what do you think happens? happened. So it turned out the intervention reduced GPA on the low ability students. So they screwed up their intervention. It was supposed to increase it by 0.05, it reduced it by 0.06, and they also saw an increase in, GPA of middle ability by 0.08, even though the predicted, was essentially 0. So, what's going on here? I guess the direction was not happy about this. Not sure whether they have more papers out of this, this kind of social experiments. So here's our main explanation. Essentially, they say that students in the treatment quadrants endogenously sorted into subgroups in ways that were not observed in the pretreatment data, right? So maybe not surprisingly in hindsight, but it's always easy to say after the fact, right?
They recognize the group by looking, even I guess that they didn't know which group was treated and controlled. But
You mean the students?
no, the teachers themselves. But they could perhaps recognize, because they look and they see a group where you have low and high, and they
Yeah.
see a group where that they would teach them differently, maybe even not consciously, and that may matter.
So that's a good point. And actually, they say in the papers that they cannot totally be sure that it's not something going on like this, that in classrooms with this bimodal structure, somehow the dynamics, of the class is such that,
You try to
you know,
teach when
such
you have
that-
some very bad and some very good, it's a problem.
so you're correct. So it's, this would be an alternative story to their to the story they to their preferred interpretation, okay? But they do have some, they went and collected further data, so they do have some direct evidence that indeed in bimodal quadrants, essentially, low ability students formed more links with other low ability students than, when these quadrants were just random, right? So some, I think they just went and asked, students with whom they were, studying and so, but they went after the fact.
What about the high ability? They were not affected at all.
They don't mention this in the paper. I don't know whether they have data on this. Presumably they have been affected as well, but not in terms of GPA. GPA is unchanged. Well, you don't have any statistically significant difference on their GPA. Okay? So so again, so they do have direct evidence that, somehow in these bimodal quadrants, low ability students just got together with other low ability students, and somehow when the squadrons were, more with a more mixed, right, set, this didn't happen. So maybe the low ability students was forming links with middle ability. So we don't know much about what is going on. I mean, they have some indirect evidence that they collected after the fact, but I think, there are some very interesting things to do from this study, right? So there are many conclusions, I think, that are potentially interesting to draw from this study. I guess the first one is that you can screw up your experiment and still get a paper in Econometrica. The second one is that, so they have a network story, but they don't have a network model, we still don't. So I think it would be interesting to develop a network model able to rationalize these results. I think we have all we need to have to do this at this stage in the literature. And you could potentially even structurally estimate this model on their data, right? I think that would be interesting to do.
We should maybe, this last statement about the bimodal study, we shouldn't take seriously the statistics, so that's close. So the first thing we need to see whether the story that they came up with afterward is actually statistically reasonable. And they sort of fish the story.
So you mean getting more data?
Yeah, we shouldn't really believe this sorting story because that wasn't their hypothesis. That's supposed to be done.
Yeah, you are getting back to Sergio's comment. There may be alternative, teaching explanations. So, yeah, maybe, but
Then you have a continuum, really. I mean, when you have, it's not by model, but the random, intervals form links with people that are a little better than you. But people that are much better than you, they won't form links with you. It's very hard. So that.
But
when you're going to
I mean-
such an extreme, that's reasonable.
You talked to me, so I don't know about that.
Sorry.
You talked to me, so I'm not sure.
So even if it's not the right story, it's still an interesting story. Clearly people, endogenously, form networks within classrooms, right? and this might affect peer effect. So even if it's not the right story in their context, I think it's still an interesting, thing to study more. And that was the last thing I wanted to say on this topic. Yeah.
Sorry, for the last point. So it says that low ability students formed more links with other low ability previously. Were they forming more links with medium or higher?
So in this statement, I think they form more links with low ability compared to what was happening before. Okay, compared to the control group. I'm not sure they, so they don't have good information on this.
My impression is it's from me talking to them. It's from medium to low.
So in the paper they don't give a lot of, I don't think they have a good, they don't have the network if you want. They have some indirect evidence that things are going in the direction of their main story, but clearly, it's an interesting issue.
Thank you.
Okay.